Students, my name is Bhargavi, and here in today's session we are continuing the topic of the last session, that is diversity in living organisms. So in this class we are going to discuss about the five kingdom classification, as we have already discussed how the classification will be done, what is the hierarchy of a classification. So this session is explaining about what are the five kingdoms which we are having. So as we have already discussed the hierarchy, we are having the species, genus, family, order, class, phylum, right? So we have a kingdom, domain, life. So this is a hierarchy which we have already explained. So in this concept, will explain about what are the five kingdoms which we are having, which was explained by the scientist R.H. Whitaker. So here we are having the five kingdoms like monera, protista, fungi, plantae and animalia. We can simply call it as monera kingdom or kingdom monera, protista kingdom, fungi kingdom, plant kingdom and animal kingdom. So first we'll discuss about the kingdom monera or monera kingdom. So here are the characteristics of the monerans. So most of the monerans are of a one-celled. So the one-celled organisms are called as unicellular. Now these organisms, they don't have any nuclear membrane or no membrane bound nucleus can be observed. We call that particular organisms as prokaryotes. And the mode of reproduction in monera is binary fission, which means one organism is going to split into the two organisms. One parent organism is dividing or splitting to form a two daughter organisms. We call that process of reproduction as a binary fission, which can be seen in paramecium, amoeba, euglena, such type of organisms. And the mode of nutrition is saprophytic. So what is meant by saprophytic nutrition? These organisms are called as the saprophytes because they are going to absorb the nutrients from the outside of their body. So usually outside of their body they will be having a complex organic matter. That complex organic matter, that is going to be converted into simple substances outside their body. After the conversion of a simple substances, that will be taken by these monerans as a nutrition source. So the attaining of this type of nutrition, we call it as the saprophytic nutrition. As a bacteria are performing such type of nutrition, we call them as a saprophytes. Now these are having a locomotory organs. Locomotory organs are nothing but which will be useful for the movement of the organisms. So the structures which will be useful are like flagella, cilia, or some of the hair-like structures which are present in these monerans will be useful for the locomotion or for the movement of an organism. Now this monera includes mainly the microorganisms like bacteria. Some monerans will cause the diseases, but some monerans will also be helpful too. Example, bacteria. So here we are having some of the shapes of a bacteria and their names. First we'll start with the spherical shape. Whenever the bacteria is spherical in shape or round in shape, we call it as a coccus. So here we are having the different types of coccus here. And we have, whenever the bacteria is in a rod shaped, we call them as a bacillus. Whenever they are curved shaped, we have a different names for this. So we'll discuss all those now. If the bacteria is present like a single and in a spherical shape, we call it as a monococcus. So whenever the bacteria is in spherical shape and they are two coccus together, we call it as a diplococcus. And a group of spherical bacteria, we call them as a staphylococcus. And a group of 4 bacteria, we call them as tetracoccus. And group of 8 organisms, a group of 8 bacteria, spherical type of bacteria, we call it as a sarcina. If these spherical bacteria, they are formed like a chain, we call them as streptococcus. So all these are the different types of cocci which we are having. And next we'll discuss about the rod shaped bacteria, we call them as a bacillus. right? So this rod shaped bacteria, we call them as a bacillus. So few bacteria, it is somewhat resembles the coccus and it just look like a bacillus or a rod shaped also. That type of bacteria we call it as a cocobacillus, which resembles both the coccus and bacillus. And we have the cylindrical type of bacteria which are arranged, which gives an appearance of palisades. We call them as palisades. And next we have, whenever two rod shaped bacteria are joined together or just staying together, we call that type of bacteria as diplobacillus. And we have some of a spore forming bacteria also. Whenever this rod shaped bacteria are forming a chain, we call it as a streptobacillus. Like streptococcus, we have a streptobacillus. And along with all these types, we have a different shapes of bacteria also. The comma shaped bacteria, we call it as a vibrous or vibrio. And we have a spiral shaped bacteria, we call it as a spirilla, which is a plural. Spirillum is a singular. And we have the ribbon shaped bacteria, we call this as spirochetes. So all these are the different types of bacteria which comes under monera. So this monera includes a major groups, mainly three groups. One is Archaebacterium. The Archaebacteria is considered as one of a ancient type of bacteria, and which was existing from the earth was formed. And these type of bacteria can survive in extreme conditions, in any conditions like hot sulfur springs, or in at high cold conditions and hot conditions. Such type of bacteria or the ancient bacteria considered as a Archaebacteria will also comes under this monera kingdom. And the next we have eubacteria. The organisms like streptococcus, rhizobium and E. coli. So E. coli, which means Escherichia coli, will comes under this type of bacteria. And another group will comes under monera is cyanobacteria. So cyanobacteria is also called as a blue-green algae. Why we are calling it, simply we can say it as a BGA or blue-green algae. This most of the people will getting confused that it is involving the algae name and bacteria name. So what is the characteristics of this? Usually it comes under algae, it is not bacteria. But when you are just going to observe that particular organism, externally it represents or resembles the algae, and internal structure resembles the bacteria. But these cyanobacteria, they are not bacteria, usually they are algae. So this diagram is showing the Archaebacteria, which is one of ancient bacteria. You can see this long head type of structure. We call it as a flagellum, and it's having the small strands. We call them as a pillars. They will be having a cell wall plasma membrane. The cytoplasm, the genetic material, is a nucleoid, which is a DNA, and the plasma membrane will also be present, and a protective layer, we call it as a capsule. Yes. And another type is eubacteria. So both are somewhat similar, but there will be having a small difference in its surviving conditions, based on its surviving conditions. And this is a cyanobacteria, or we can also call it as a blue-green algae. Mostly you can see on a water green matte algal blooms are formed due to because of this. If you are observing under the microscope, this particular cyanobacteria are going to appear like this. So that's about the monera. We'll discuss about the kingdom 2, that is protista. Protista is also called as protoctista. We'll see the characteristics of these protista. These are also one-celled, we'll be considering as a unicellular, but some of a protista, they may be multicellular also. And they comes under eukaryotes, means they are having the membrane bound nucleus. and they are just getting nutrition and energy by eating the other organisms. So such type of organisms are called as heterotrophs or consumers. Spelling is wrong here. So that is heterotrophs or consumers. Now some get the energy from the sun, few protistans will get the energy from the sun, and they are just going to absorb the nutrients from the water which is present around them. And these organisms, they may live either solitary means they can live single, or they can live in a colonies. Only some cell organelles are present inside the cell, and the mode of reproduction is common as we have discussed in a monera, that is a binary fission, as the organisms are splitting into two. The examples are amoeba, paramecium, euglena, kelp and algae. So all these examples I just have used in the case of monera only for the explanation of this binary fission. Usually all these organisms will come under protista. So these are the examples of this protista. This is a euglena, paramecium, amoeba, slime molds, diatoms, kelp. So all these comes under protista kingdom, and those are the characteristics of that. So the next classification which we are having is fungi. So the fungi, which is multicellular organisms, are grouped in a fungi. So many cells are present, and few organisms may be containing the less cells, and they are eukaryotes, and they will be having a prominent head. So this prominent head we can see mostly in a rainy seasons on the bark of a tree or from the ground. They are just protruding from the soil or from the trees. We call mostly we can see the mushrooms. So those are all comes under this fungi kingdom. So these are getting the nutrients, or they are getting the nutrition by absorbing or by digesting the surface. These fungi are getting the nutrition. For example, if this is a plant, fungi is growing over that, it is just starts absorbing all the plant nutrients and it just starts growing. Okay, and mostly they are just reproducing by the spore formation or by the spores. For example, yeast or the Saccharomyces, lichens, bread molds and mushrooms. So when you have seen, this is a yeast or the Saccharomyces, which is having another type of reproduction, that is budding, and this is a lichens or the lichens which will be absorbed mostly in a rainy seasons on a wood or the trees. And this is a bread mold. Mostly you might have observed that when you leave the bread for longer time, with the moisture will helps to this fungi to grow over that. And these are the mushrooms. So all the mushrooms are not edible, which also comes under the fungi. We can also call the mushrooms as a agaricus.